drink something without advertising.
Well, we're live.
We're live. We're
So,
live.
hello,
We're live.
everybody.
Hello.
Please
Why
excuse
can't-
Richard while he drinks something without advertising.
Why are we not supposed to drink? I'm gonna drink.
Go for it.
I-
It's a free podcast. You support
Pro
democracy
democracy,
here.
even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, welcome to the show, everybody. Today, we're very excited to have Kevin Gosztola and Richard Medhurst, two excellent journalists who have been two of my favorite journalists who have been covering the Assange trial, or the U.S. appeal to the non-extradition of Julian Assange from the UK to the United States. I thought that it would be such an amazing idea to have both of them on together. Because they've both been covering this and just get a really informed conversation started. It seems that a competitor and friend of mine, Katie Halper, has already done that. So thank you, Katie, for stealing my idea before I announced it. But welcome to the show, guys.
But Alex, she put that behind a paywall for her subscribers, so you have a chance to get an edge on her if you make some of this more widely available.
Yeah, well, this is unfortunately paywalled as well, but I promise
okay.
you, Katie's podcast is doing very well. So come over to us.
Yeah. We'll do that for you. We'll do that for you.
All right. So Kevin is the editor of Shadowproof. Richard, what don't you do, man? You got your own show. You got a press TV show. Really awesome, informative viewing experience. So thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you for having us. It's really a pleasure to be invited on to talk about this and to be here with Kevin. It's really great. And yeah, what more can I say? We're gonna make sure that as many people as possible watch this, just as with Katie's and everything, because the Assange thing, if there's no coverage, and if there is coverage, it's dishonest coverage. I was seeing something from the BBC. They uploaded it 5 days ago, so just before or just on the cusp of the High Court appeal. And I mean, this is an astonishing video because what they talk about in it, they kind of like try to talk about the case as if the extradition hearing was just about to begin. So, they're repeating all these lies and smears, and it's just a hatchet job about Assange. And then there's like just one sentence about his health. And now, don't get me wrong, I would very much prefer that we did not focus on his health because, of course, it's a private matter. It shouldn't be just about his health, like that he's not extradited. He should not be extradited because it's wrong, But the way they did it in the BBC was kind of just like going through all these smears, like asking if WikiLeaks harmed people, and it's just crazy. You've got in the background like the collateral murder video playing, where there's like a gunship killing Iraqi civilians and two Reuters journalists, and he's worried about whether WikiLeaks hurt anyone, which I mean has been debunked by the United States' own Department of Defense. So, it's like I said, it's important to talk about this. I don't think we can overstate that enough.
And you had written an article recently saying that this trial was essentially hinging on proving Assange having to prove how suicidal he is. And to me, this seems so absurd.
Yeah, it is. Just like even without Julian Assange in the picture and the fact that it's criminalizing journalism, like just the things that they say in the courtroom is so insulting to anyone who struggled with mental health. It's insulting to the medical experts themselves, who are some of the best in the world, and they're coming there and being lectured by a lawyer. He's not a doctor, I think he's doing it on purpose. He says absurd things like Julian asked for milk and oranges or something, and like what does it have to do with anything? Who cares what he's consuming? So yeah, it does hinge on that. Unfortunately, it's gotten to a point where it's just about his health, but it shouldn't just be about that. And this is why we see what's so wrong with the decision in January. So like it was bittersweet. It's like, great, the judge blocked the extradition, but she only did it on health grounds. And now we're seeing in court why this is so bad, because there's nothing about journalism. There's nothing about free speech, journalistic freedoms, about how this criminalizes journalism. Nothing. It's all about his health. And even then it's insulting and completely like if Assange is suicidal, who made him suicidal? Who triggered and brought on all this mental illness? It's the persecution. Anyone would be mentally ill or suffer to a greater degree from their mental illness after a political persecution that lasts a decade, of course, But I mean, that's not the only reason he shouldn't be extradited, of course.
Yeah, an actual thing that we heard during the proceedings came from the defense team, where they had to say people with autism spectrum disorder have had girlfriends too. I mean, we see throughout these proceedings so many examples of the stigmatization of people with mental health issues. And so that's been a reality. And what Richard's pointing to is really important, because the way in which Vanessa Baraitser ruled, we're seeing before the High Court of Justice, it's tenuous. It can fall apart pretty quickly. There are things that the U.S. government can try. The chief one being this offering of diplomatic assurances to completely get around all the concerns that the judge had. And it may work. That's the really unfortunate and dismal part of the legal case against Julian Assange, is that in the end, it may end up being persuasive enough to the High Court of Justice to overturn all the work that the district judge did on this very small part, where she looked at the evidence and determined it would be oppressive to extradite Julian Assange.
So I want to ask, just to clarify, I mean, last week, the U.S. appeal against the non-extradition started. How long does this go on for? And what is the prosecution's argument look like?
Well, do you have a crystal ball? Because the problem is it could go on forever. That's kind of the point, That's to torture him. And they know this. They know this, of course, that it takes a long time. And I mean, what the prosecution's arguments are, well, basically they're saying that they're appealing on 5 grounds, right? But just to sum it up, it's on 2 subjects, mainly his health and the assurances that Kevin just pointed to. And so, I share Kevin's fears that this just might work with the assurances, because, they're saying that the phrase was, these are not dished out like Smarties. They said these are diplomatic assurances. They're not just any assurances, And so they're trying to say that the United States has never broken diplomatic assurances. I'm not sure that's true. But anyway, when it comes to the health aspect, they're saying that, the medical expert Koppelman misled the court, which, I mean, how much time do you have? Because I think Kevin and I can go really into detail. But
we have time, and I mean that's why we wanted both of you guys on to really dig into the ground here.
Yeah, so they're saying that he misled the court, which again I find this incredible, because he didn't mislead he didn't mislead the court at all. They're accusing him of that because in his first psychiatric evaluation he didn't disclose the name of Assange's partner, Stella Morris, and that they had 2 children, which again has nothing to do with psychiatry. Even the judge herself, she said she understood why he did it. She said it was an understandable human response to Miss Morris' understandable predicament. So it's basically she was aware, the tabloid press, the British press will tear this relationship apart. They will attack them. And not to mention you have the CIA and other 3-letter agencies interested. So she got it. And even despite that, she gave the most weight to his medical testimony, even in spite of that. So that they're not happy, of course, the prosecution. They're saying this is unacceptable. You should either completely exclude it. It should be inadmissible, or it should be given less weight. And then I think if I'm not mistaken, in court, when the judges asked for clarification, which they want, I think they said that they wanted it to be given less weight, not to completely exclude it. But yeah, that's one of the grounds. The other ground, I think, so just to sum up the 5 grounds, they're saying also that Assange does not meet the threshold for blocking an extradition. They say that he cannot control, that basically their argument is, if you cannot control the impulse to commit suicide, then it's okay not to extradite you. Then you're too unfit. You're too mentally unfit. But they're saying Assange can control it. So he's not so suicidal that he cannot be extradited. And again, this is not true. If according to the medical experts, it's true that only one of them, Koppelman, said this about Assange, but well, that's still one doctor who's saying that, right? So it goes against what the prosecutors are trying to say. And nevertheless, all 5 doctors, even the ones called by the prosecution, agree that Assange has they agree he has depression and a risk of suicide, but to varying degrees, right? So, for example, Fazell, who's called by the prosecution, he makes this absurd argument that Assange is not at high risk of suicide because to be at high risk of suicide, you have to compare him to other prisoners in the same age group and sex. Which, I mean, this is they're really trying to wiggle out of this, and I think this is an absurd argument because it's so dismissive and insulting to Julian and to, I think, anyone who's struggled with mental health. And also even the defense said, well, the US has a prison population 7 times higher, so you can't you have people locked up for a joint of marijuana, so it's not like you can make an accurate comparison there. Yeah, and I mean, when we look at the assurances that Kevin brought up, they're saying that he won't be placed in SAMS, special administrative measures, and he won't go to ADX Florence in Colorado, and he can maybe serve a sentence in Australia. But the defense, they showed all these examples where the United States lied. They told people that they won't put them in SAMS or ADX, and then once they got to the United States, they were sent there. And I think they're trying to do this again because the assurances have been given by the prosecutors, not the Department of Justice. And the lawyers for Assange pointed this out, right? So if Assange is extradited, he can get there, and then the DOJ says, we never agreed to this. That was the prosecutors, I mean, this is so dishonest. It's unbelievable how they're trying to get away with this. And I think the lawyers made a great point, Assange's lawyers, that even if you don't put Assange in some hellhole like ADX Florence or special administrative measures, they have other things they can put him in. It's not like the United States has any shortage of horrific prison conditions. There's a whole prison industry in the US, and they have things like special housing units, communications management units. I think it was Daniel Hale, I think, was put into one of those Kevin was talking about last time. So, I mean, they're very creative. So the notion here is that no matter what assurances the prosecution give, if Assange is taken to the US, he will be put in a hellhole. Call it whatever you like. Call it ADX, call it SFX. It doesn't matter. He's going to be put into a hellhole, whether it's a special housing unit. It doesn't matter. They will come up with something. That's very important to understand because the agency responsible for deciding SAMS, just if we look at SAMS, is the CIA. The CIA were talking about killing this guy. Assange published documents from the CIA. You think they won't put him in SAMS? Come on. This is just naive to suggest otherwise.
Yeah, well, the Justice Department, the Attorney General signs off, but the CIA gets to make a formal recommendation to the Justice Department and say, we want you to designate him for SAMS because we're afraid that he would breach U.S. national security and publish classified information that would put us at risk. And that's the way that they view. I mean, we need to remember that almost everything that the U.S. government has ever said in response to a WikiLeaks publication is that it is a threat to national security without giving any evidence whatsoever. They say things like WikiLeaks has blood on their hands, like Richard said at the top. And to speak in those terms and believe that the CIA is not going to advocate for the harshest restrictions is it's not believable. You just can't believe that the CIA is going to sit back and let Julian Assange go into general population in a jail if he's awaiting trial or in a federal prison were he to be convicted. And I'd say on Koppelman, so the few things I want to add to what Richard laid out there is that Koppelman is the doctor. The reason why he's the one doctor who gets to be taken seriously when he says that Julian Assange would not be able to resist his suicidal impulses is because he's the doctor who saw him the most between May 2019 and December 2019. So he's the person who is best equipped to assess Julian Assange's state as a human being right now and how it's been destroyed and the toll that arbitrary detention has taken on him the last decade plus that he's been going through this ordeal that has been thrust upon him by the U.S. government waging this war on WikiLeaks. And And then to talk about the CMUs, this is really important. So when you look at the assurances about prison conditions for, let's say, ADX Florence or the SAMs, what is not there in the assurances is an assurance that we will not place him in a communications management unit. And a communications management unit, in fact, is something that Gordon Kromberg, the lead prosecutor on this, has told the high court, as well as the lower court for where Vanessa Barretzer ruled, has said it is possible that Julian Assange would be put. And why is that important? Because as Richard was mentioning, Daniel Hale, this drone whistleblower, was transferred to a CMU in Marion, Illinois. Now, these are treated like little gitmos in the United States. There's one in Terre Haute and there's one in Marion, Illinois. These are state penitentiaries. These are U.S. penitentiaries. And there you get put in this wing for CMU where they get to basically restrict all your communications. And they get to prevent you from having non-contact visits. So that means that Julian Assange would not be able to hug or kiss his children or his partner, Stella Morris, if they came to visit him in a CMU, whether it was Terre Haute or Marion. An FBI agent has to be available when you want to make a phone call. And the Bureau of Prisons has the ability to restrict who you call. And they can limit it to immediate family. So there are a whole range of people who could be in Assange's support network who he would never have a chance to talk to once he was put in a CMU. This is already happening to Daniel Hale, who had whistleblowers that supported him before he was convicted. And then now they're not on his list and he can't talk to them, like John Kiriakou, a CIA whistleblower. So this is something we have to consider of the sort of restrictions that will be imposed that will remove the support network, which is helping him to deal with those suicidal impulses while he is in Belmarsh, the people who are there to ensure that nothing worse happens. They say this phrase protective factors when talking about Belmarsh because there are aspects of his confinement in Belmarsh that are noticeably better than what they would be in the United States. That is, there's a small group of staff that is giving him around-the-clock attention would he need it, as somebody who is designated for this program due to his mental health. That doesn't exist in the United States. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. No matter what Gordon Kromberg wants to claim to the High Court of Justice, the Bureau of Prisons goes out of its way to figure out why prisoners do not need medical care and then refuse to give it. And there's even something I just noticed in Kromberg's submission to the court where he's talking about the conditions of prisons. He describes Bureau of Prisons healthcare as what you get on your health insurance plan. Now, anybody who knows anything about health insurance in the United States would laugh at that, and especially when comparing it to the way people receive treatment in European countries, they would laugh hysterically because health insurance is set up to not provide care. It is, they want to pay the least amount of money for the least amount of care. And if you ask for additional care, then you have to fund it out of pocket. Well, Assange isn't going to be able to get care out of pocket while he's in prison. And he's also not going to be able to arrange for it because they'd have to give him permission to leave the prison to go get that medical care. So he's basically out of luck. And so there's no way you can even believe that this assurance about medical care has anything reasonable behind it. It's and people will say for each of these assurances, I don't have to convince the people who are participating in this stream, but people will say that all of these have loopholes that you can drive a truck through. And that is why they should not be taken seriously. We haven't gotten to the Australia assurance, so we should just briefly mention, and then I'll let Richard or you guys can ask other questions if you want. But there's this thing about how Julian Assange could be transferred to Australia because he's an Australian citizen, the only time that they really seem to care that he's an Australian citizen and not a U.S. citizen, and that so he could apply for a prisoner transfer to Australia to serve his sentence if he's convicted. But I just want to quickly say the reason why this is ridiculous is laid out by the legal team as such, that basically in order to do this, the Australian government has to consent to it. And there's no indication that Australia would ever be open to this prisoner transfer. And then if they have some problem politically, like I imagine there might need to be some changes in the people who are running the country for this to happen. But if they think that the U.S. mounted a political case and they don't want to be involved in this, they could say, no, we don't want Assange to be moved to the to our country to be imprisoned. We don't think we could actually even uphold the terms of this because you have a political prisoner. So then they could say, we don't want him to be extradited to, or we don't want him to be transferred to our country. And then the US would just leave him in a prison because they couldn't get a guarantee from the Australian government that they would keep him imprisoned. So there's all sorts of problems with what the US government is claiming to this high court.
Yeah. And I mean, you and I both know from our work on prisons here that, Assange would probably not last very long, whether it's vindictive guards hired by whoever, it's more than likely that something would happen to him inside the United States. I can't speak for Australia, but I suspect it's much the same, right? So you guys have no kind of insight onto when a ruling might come down on this?
I mean,
well,
the understanding was that it could take weeks or months, just for the appeal court.
I mean, do you want to put something on screen here and show people what we're looking at as far as the path forward? We did this. I did this with Richard. Yeah.
Yeah. There's there's a plethora of possible outcomes. And Kevin pulled up this really nice.
Here. So there's an image there that comes from an attorney, I think maybe working with the Assange team in some capacity, but Kelly Tranter is actually based in Australia. If you're able to open it up and do a share screen and show people who are watching, there's a graphic with a flow chart that shows the different ways that this could unfold in the next several years. And it's not good for Julian Assange. It shows the different routes that this case could go. And it's even like before it would get to the United States. And this is what we're talking about when Richard or myself say punishment by process, that this keeps him in confinement while this is all unfolding. He's denied bail. And an important point to make while you're trying to pull this up is...
I have no idea how to do that. Did you send it to me somewhere? Or?
I put it in the private chat.
It's in the private chat in the StreamYard chat.
Unless I have the ability to do it, I could try. Do you want me to try to do it?
Yeah, if you could, because I'm looking at the private chat in the StreamYard and I don't see it. I apologize to our viewers for this.
All right. I don't know. I mean, let's see. I think you might have given me the ability to do it. Let's see if it lets me do it. You just allowed me to do it. Okay, so let me do it. I'll do it this way. So here you go.
Wow.
So this is, and then I'm going to make it bigger and then where I'm circling here, this is the appeal. You see, this is appeals to the high court. This is where we're at. We're also down here, U.S. appeals to the high court. So the routes that we can go, we could see it dismissed. If it's dismissed, we obviously know that the United States won't be happy. They're going to appeal to the Supreme Court. If it goes to if the high court says we're going to allow the assurances, we're going to allow the extradition, it is possible it gets kicked back down to the district court, and not necessarily Vanessa Baretzer, but another district judge reviews the case. And then if they're going to allow the assurances, the other thing they might do is Julian Assange's team will want to challenge those assurances because they were not brought up during the extradition. They were not brought up during the extradition hearing in September 2020, the one that lasted a month. These people who came before the witnesses, the evidence, none of it had anything to do with the assurances, and the U.S. government didn't put forward any diplomatic assurances because they really believed that there was nothing about U.S. prison conditions that said there would be any problem with putting him in the U.S., that it would be humane. They believed that their arguments convinced the judge that it would all be humane. And so the team for Assange wants to be able to call people and challenge those assurances, which they should do. They're entitled to have that hearing, but it's going to prolong all of this. And it means it would probably go back down to here to the district court, and then the district court would rule. And based on that ruling, then there'd be an appeal to the high court. And again, we start this all over. We go back to the Supreme Court. You can see how like this will take a very long time. And we're not even getting to the part where he gets his extradition is signed off on and he's sent to the United States.
Yeah, it's horrific, honestly. You know, I spoke to Gary McKinnon. Gary, you know, he perpetrated what is called the biggest computer hack of all time. He hacked the DOD, NASA, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, everything. And they did the same thing that they're doing with Assange. They trumped up the charges. They said that he caused millions of dollars in damages. I mean, even calling it a hack is a bit, there were no passwords on the administrator accounts. So, you know, anyone could just waltz in. And he said that there were other people connected. And my point here is that this was just right around the time where they were finalizing the extradition treaty that you have between the US and the UK. So this is during the Blair and Bush era. And he was sort of the one of the first people to get slapped with that. Although, again, they were starting to go after him before it was even enacted. But his battle lasted 10 years, you know, and I think he exhausted all his options. If I recall correctly, it made its way to the Supreme Court wouldn't even hear it, actually. And then he got lucky, and Theresa May, the Home Secretary at the time, she withdrew the extradition. So, I mean, that's, you know, it's a saving grace. It's probably one of the only good things she's ever done. But, you know, if
that was on mental health grounds. That was on mental health grounds.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So it was again about Asperger's and mental health grounds, as Kevin correctly puts it. And Lori Love, of course, you know, the same thing, a long extradition battle. And I mean, just given the pattern, you know, Gary McKinnon and Lori Love, they spent years and years and years going through this tedious, exhausting, horrific process, you know. And Assange, I think, just politically speaking, has a way, way bigger target on his back. So if they did that to Gary McKinnon and Lori Love, what are they going to do to Assange? You know, they're really like all in, and you can see that Trump goes out and Biden comes in, and he's picking up right where Trump left off. There's no remorse, there's no second thoughts. It's just keep going with it. And something interesting I saw in that Yahoo News investigation. There's this line where, you know, they're talking about how the CIA was discussing plans to potentially kidnap or poison Assange. And then there's this line that this predated Mike Pompeo's arrival at the CIA. I wonder what that means concretely. Like predates by how much? Like, you know, are we talking about it's going back to the Obama administration? Because there's this whole point that was made in the extradition hearing that, you know, they were saying that the defense were saying that the Obama administration did not prosecute Julian because they saw that this would clearly, you know, they'd have to prosecute the New York Times. This would criminalize journalism. And the prosecution made the argument that, yes, Obama did not prosecute Julian, but he didn't explicitly rule it out either, right? So there's this whole talk. And when I'm seeing that these, you know, it's just funny when you put that together with this line that says it predated Mike Pompeo. I was just curious by how long, because, you know, if they were discussing this during the Obama administration, well, what do I need to say? But yeah, it's just really process, a punishment by process. And you know, in Belmarsh prison, Kevin is right. It is somewhat better than what he would have in the U.S. But you know, Belmarsh prison is still, you know, it's a category A. It's a maximum security prison in England. It's the most famous one. And just to give you some context, I remember, I think this is when Cameron was prime minister. You had a Jordanian cleric called Abu Qatada, and you know, he was considered, I think his nickname or something was like Bin Laden's right-hand man in Europe or something. You know, he's a very senior figure in Al Qaeda, and he was in Belmarsh prison, and they let him out. They let him out on house arrest. So, you know, they're letting people from Al Qaeda out of this prison on house arrest, but they won't let Julian Assange out. What does that tell you? What does that tell you?
Did they send him to Syria as well?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, given their politics on Syria, I'm almost not that surprised. But I mean, this whole no, exactly, and it's like, I mean, we've kind of seen, like, I mean, this is a little off topic, but I do really think that like they'll they will be softer on like literal jihadis in like the UK or in the US than they will be on like anyone that threatens the empire, seriously threatens the empire. And if you like even take a step back, the whole thing here looks really twisted. Like even the premise that we need to, you know, that like, oh, if he's suicidal, then he doesn't go to this prison, but if he's not, then he can go to, like, even that whole premise just seems really absurd and not really aligned with what the legal system is, you know, preaching itself, or like as the legal system in the UK or in the West portrays itself to be. It's actually very it's very much a show trial. There's no like like what is going to be achieved by even having him in prison? It's just to send a message.
Exactly.
Let me throw something else out there. Is it okay?
I just want to add one last thing about Abu Qatada, because we're talking about extradition. You know, Jordan wanted to extradite him from the UK, and there was this whole conversation in the UK and specifically from the EU that you can't extradite him because the evidence obtained was obtained through torture, right? So if he went to trial in Jordan for these bombings, it was 2 of them. You know, he'd be put on trial with tainted evidence. So you know what the UK did? They drafted a whole brand new extradition treaty for this terrorist, just to make sure that if he's extradited, nothing will be used against him. And as you can probably guess, he went to Jordan, and he's a free man now. So you know, there you go. That's how the UK and the US treat Al Qaeda, and how they treat journalists. I think is a stark contrast.
Kevin, if you want to make your point, and then after that, I'm going to end the Twitter live stream and move exclusively over to Rockfin to finish off this conversation. There's a lot more to come, so I hope you guys join us there.
So just one last thing on this tragedy and farce before we move over. So one thing that has been stated about the assurances from this Crown Prosecution Service, and they're being pushed to say this by Gordon Kromberg, is that these are binding diplomatic assurances. They're binding in that if they are violated, Julian Assange would be able to challenge them. Now, how do they think that Julian Assange can challenge them? They say he could go to, this is where I think it's a laugh riot. He could go to the UK government and say that he's upset that the US government has violated these assurances. And these are like the last people who are going to give any shits about what Julian Assange is saying the US government has done to him. I mean, the fact of the matter is the UK government, we find out through the Yahoo News report, is responsible for keeping the bail jumping charge on his record as a service so that they would have a pretext to take him into custody and arrest him and hold him for as long as was necessary so that then he could be extradited and brought to the United States. So the bail jumping charge, this idea that, you know, when he was pursued by Sweden for the sexual allegations that, you know, obviously that's a whole separate other matter that could fill 2 hours. And we've moved way beyond that at this point. But Niels Meltzer did some really good documentation of the due process violations inherent in that case. But, you know, he's treated as a fugitive simply for seeking out political asylum from Ecuador and entering that embassy. And that's where they get this idea that he jumped bail. And so then from that point onward, the UK basically has him in their clutches. You know, anytime he exits the embassy, they're going to be able to arrest him and take him into detention. So that's a service to the United States. So if you think they're going to act independently of the US government and advocate for him while he is being mistreated or abused in the United States, then you're really gullible. You're truly a gullible person.
Yeah. Well, maybe you could write a letter to Prince Harry or something. But with that, I'm gonna end the Twitter live stream. I hope that you guys join us on Rockfin. It's rokfin.com/prodempod. There's a lot more to come, so please join us there. You know, and we've been talking a lot about the punishment by process, and Richard mentioned Gary McKinnon, who, you know, I think it's fair to say that Assange, as you said, has a bigger target on his back. Gary McKinnon took him 10 years to navigate this legal process. So in the very least, we could expect 10 years for Assange. I mean, worst case scenario, it could be worse. Best case scenario, obviously, it's much different. But what I think is important to note is that this has been an ongoing process for a long time. We're talking about 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy, which is like, it's not all that different from a prison, right? I mean, it's of course a little bit more comfortable, nicer bed. You can have guests they may be spied on and have things, information stolen from them, but you can have contact with your family. It's not being sent over to a country across the ocean from his wife. But it's a 7-year process already, and we're talking about how it's been more than a year in Belmarsh already, hasn't it?
Yep, over 2 years now.
So I mean, it's an ongoing torture that's happening against him, and it's just disgusting for me to see, jihadists who service the empire, being like, just okay, you can go now, go off to back to the.
Like a red carpet private jet they gave him, to Qatar. I'm not kidding. Like, it's insane. And escorted by MI5 to the airport, private jet. It's incredible. It's I mean, it's not shocking when as you all know, given the history and the context of the UK and the US, but nevertheless, it is disgusting. And I do think it's important to underscore, what Kevin said with Niels Meltzer, for example, because Niels, they attacked his report, by the way, because he's a UN Special Rapporteur on torture. And of course, they were bringing up his report now in the court again and saying,
Richard, it's raconteur.
I didn't want to say it. I heard that too. Niels Schmelzer, he called him, and called him the raconteur. I didn't want to make fun of everything. I was like, stay focused. But yeah, he called him that. And, basically, Niels visited Assange in Belmarsh with, I think, 2 physicians, and I think at least one of them was a psychiatrist. And the thing is, in his report, he wrote that Assange is a victim of a political witch hunt. He's being bullied, harassed by all these governments. And then also he included the evaluation by the physicians who said that, he shows all the symptoms of prolonged psychological torture. And so Koppelman, the key medical expert for the defense, he quotes just the medical parts, which are relevant to his testimony because it's medical evidence. And then, they're absolutely mad at him because they say, yeah, you quoted some politicized report, which says the defendant is the victim of a political witch hunt. And, this is absurd because he's not quoting any of that. He just quoted the parts relevant to the medical examination in the prison. But of course, they try as much as they can to discredit any kind of truthful evaluation, be it psychiatric or physical. And the thing is, in the Ecuadorian embassy, I mean, we had a medical testimony as well about how that impacted Assange's health there because, for example, he couldn't visit a dentist. These are things that can put you at risk of infection. You have other physical issues, so not just mental issues, because that's been the main focus, but just physically wears you down. And of course, like you said, Alex, you have some amenities. You can be visited by your family and spied on. I
spent 19 days in the embassy, so
yeah. So that's. It's not the best thing, but I mean, it's not the worst thing because you can visit, your family can visit you and other people, like the support network that Kevin talked about. But yeah, it really messes with your physical and mental health. So I do think it's important to underscore that. And this idea that he jumped bail, which Kevin eloquently pointed to, it's absurd. Of course, under the UK law, they're going to say he jumped bail. Every political persecution uses the current laws to attack the person in question, and so they say that he jumped bail, but it's his right under international law to request political asylums. He did nothing wrong or illegal. It's the UK government who are acting at the behest of the US and violating their own laws. I think that's really important to put into context because you look at EU law, you look at US law, UK law. There's nothing that this whole case doesn't violate. It's extraordinary. I think last time Kevin and I were talking about how they gave over all his his belongings. They handed them over. That's tainted evidence. If we're being frank, if he goes to the US, there's he's sure to be convicted because they're going to try him in this espionage court. You have all the people sitting on the jury who are like basically working at the CIA or have family or friends working in the CIA, and at the same time they have things that they've stolen from him that no one knows about because it's classified. So that he has no idea what he's going to face in the U.S. So if this were happening in another country, I don't think anyone would hesitate to call it a political witch hunt and to condemn it. But because it's the United States doing it, there's a whole other metric applied here. There's everyone turns a blind eye and they act like it's, oh, well, he broke the law. And what are you talking about? It's incredible. And it's really frustrating listening to people, I think, who are not even covering this. So, you see some people on Twitter or whatever who are just making up absurd lies. I think Kevin knows what I'm talking about. They just make up absurd things about Assange and about the defense, and it's unfortunately very badly reported on. There's no coverage, and if there is coverage from mainstream outlets, it's usually just distorted nonsense. So yeah, it's important to set the record straight, and unfortunately, it takes a long time, but it's really important doing. And there's no way you can look at this case and not find gaping huge holes in it. It's extraordinary.
Well, what stuck out to me is you were saying they, correct me if I'm wrong, but they admitted evidence that basically amounted to somebody saying, oh, he accepted orange juice and milk, and so therefore that's evidence against him being suicidal. But then they don't want to admit evidence that from the defense's medical expert.
Yeah, so basically the lead prosecutor, Lewis, he would point to things like, Assange was consuming milk and oranges, or he requested milk and oranges. The audio is terrible, so sometimes we miss a few words. But the point here was that he's acting well enough. And I mean, this is extraordinary because according to Lewis, then, anyone who's mentally ill has never consumed milk and oranges. It's absurd. And there are other things like, he was reading the British Medical Journal. So maybe he read something in the journal and he's faking his illness because he read. These are the kinds of absurdities that we're hearing. And
he went to the law library. That was another one that he'll go to the legal library and he'll read materials. He's engaged in his own extradition hearings. So that means he can't be insane. It's nuts.
Yeah.
It just sounds very incompetent on the part. It sounds like a competent court would not even accept these arguments at all. They wouldn't hear it,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one would hope so, but we're not dealing with a competent court.
I know, but it's crazy because I mean, it doesn't have any probative value to the case at all. None of these points have any value in assessing what the outcome should be, and so it just seems very absurd. It's like I said today on Twitter, I've seen some pretty outrageous cases, but I haven't seen anything like this.
Yeah,
it's the court system of a client state. That's the problem. And they're so forgiving. No matter how many times in the last decade plus that you could point to the United States not telling them the truth, including in war on terrorism cases. I was just looking over, I've been reading through some of the materials from the appeal hearing that were submitted. And then that led me to this really, really long thing written by Amnesty International that took me back to these cases from the 2000s in the war on terrorism, where they were challenging things like torture and rendition, and they were upset, and they were trying to stop the extradition of people in the UK who were going to be possibly designated as enemy combatants and taken to Guantanamo and not put in the federal court system under, let's say, Bush. But then the UK was actually being lied to about those terrorism defense, much in the same way that I believe they're being lied to about Julian Assange now. And yet it's like that institutional memory doesn't mean anything for the High Court of Justice. They're so forgiving. They're willing to believe that it'll be different this time and not the same as these past times when they've been duped.
Yeah. Well, the whole prosecution is so grotesque that even the dictator of Azerbaijan recognizes that it's grotesque. I mean, how much more evidence do you need? But, one thing that really strikes me about the appeal hearings is that the U.S. keeps promising diplomatic assurances, which is just like, it's just the peak of absurdity when this is happening 2 weeks after the United States kidnapped a Venezuelan diplomat trying to secure food imports for his country. So to have them come out 2 weeks later and say, "Oh, well, don't worry about it. We're going to give them diplomatic assurances," when clearly diplomatic immunity means nothing to the United States government, it's just a slap in the face. And the British court, you're right, Kevin. They don't want to acknowledge what happened 2 weeks ago, let alone in the early 2000s with these terror cases.
Yeah, and in the case of Alex Saab, that's actually a really good case to bring in here because I think it fits in with a family of cases that show how the Justice Department is allowing the rule of law to be stretched like an elastic waistband in ways that that just shouldn't be allowed to happen, because this is a law that, and we're talking about sanctions law, that they're seeking to impose on a Venezuelan diplomat. Like, he should have to follow U.S. sanctions law. It should only apply, if it even is reasonable to apply it, to people who are in the United States. And they're bringing him and they're going to put him on trial. Now they're doing that to Julian Assange. Julian Assange, an Australian who they're saying U.S. secrecy laws have to be followed now by anyone around the world. And if you're a high-profile person who we don't like, who we think is hostile, like Julian Assange, we're going to try to extradite you and bring you here. And then I had to put it alongside what we've seen in the last couple of weeks with the escalation against Stephen Donziger, who Chevron successfully managed to get put into a prison and moved from house arrest, where he had been on there for 800 plus days. But the Justice Department is apparently fine with a corporation taking over the prosecutorial process and using the court system to punish their enemies. So the perversion of, quote unquote, the rule of law in the US it's incredible. Over the last, just in this year alone, we are seeing things play out under Joe Biden, and you just get a shrug, or you get a shrug and you get complete silence from the Biden administration. And they won't acknowledge their participants in all of this. They want to pretend like this all comes from Donald Trump, and they're cowards. They won't take questions from reporters. And then today is, it's just, I can't even stand it. The International Day to End Impunity.
I was about to bring that up. I saw your tweet. I was just about to say that.
For crimes against journalists. I mean, honestly, it's really hard to take, but I feel like I should just read this for the podcast just so that people can hear this statement that was put together. And it sounds to my ears like violence, but they wrote, "A free and independent press holds leaders accountable, protects the rights of citizens, ensures our communities are well informed. In too many countries, journalists face the threat of violence or imprisonment for their reporting. The United States condemns threats, harassment, and violence targeting journalists and media workers. Increasingly, these threats come from governments reaching beyond their borders, including through the misuse of digital surveillance tools that track journalists' communications and whereabouts to constrain the ability of journalists to report on government corruption or repression. No members of the press should be threatened, harassed, physically attacked, or arrested for doing their job." And there's more here, but it really doesn't say anything that different.
Real quick, and I'll go back to you, but I think it's worth pointing out here that Ned Price was a CIA agent. This is a guy who worked for the agency that was planning on assassinating Julian Assange. And he quit the CIA in protest of Trump, not because of Assange, of course, but because of these the norm breaking, the rule of law violations, the international
norms,
being ignored by the United States, the international alliances. These are all the reasons that these State Department types cited for hating Trump so much, and now they're doing the same fucking thing with Julian Assange.
Go ahead. I'll let Richard get in, and then I'll say whatever else.
No, Kevin is absolutely right. You have, if at all these sanctions violations should be, acted upon, it should be in the U.S., but Joe Biden is just going mental with this. For example, last year, Trump, he he basically said that channels like Press TV are being controlled by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is, basically sanctioned now. And he doesn't do anything except, I think, Google starts banning Press TV. And then Joe Biden comes in. And Joe Biden, this is what's insane. They didn't just ban Press TV, not just Press TV, like 30 other channels, Arabic ones, Persian ones. They didn't just ban them in the United States, which would be bad enough. They literally took the domains out. Like, I've never seen this before, So you go to presstv.com, it's just disappeared. It's just gone.
Yeah,
it
you
says
get that
it's been
notice from
seized.
the FBI too.
Yeah, I get so annoyed. Sometimes I'm looking something up and I click on the wrong link because it's the first one on Google, and I see that this domain has been seized. This is a news outlet that is outside the United States. It employs most of its people outside the United States. It's not based in the United States, and they're extraterritorializing everything, And with Alex Saab, I mean, this is astonishing that they are trying to say they're going to give diplomatic assurances. They don't even respect the Vienna Convention, which is the basis of all diplomacy and diplomatic protections. Because I've never heard of a diplomat being. Look, diplomatic immunity is something that they came up with to protect diplomats, from being accused of being spies and so on. The thing is, if you murder someone, you have a machine gun or something, then sure, the police have, they have good reason to arrest you, even if you're a diplomat. But in the case of Alex Saab, I've never heard of someone being arrested for violating U.S. sanctions and deported. Like, this is outrageous. This is outrageous. Yeah. And you can see the double standard in not just this, how they treat their own diplomats, but also with extraditions. If you look at Anne Sakulis, I think her name was, she's she literally killed Harry Dunn, a 17-year-old, by driving on the wrong side of the road like an utter fool. And she fled the United Kingdom to the United States, and then Trump refuses to extradite her. There's like under no circumstances to their own ally, the UK. But meanwhile, the UK is like bending over backwards to extradite Julian Assange. It's unbelievable. I mean, it makes me sick. It's really disgusting.
She was an actual CIA agent who they claimed had diplomatic immunity, even though CIA agents aren't technically supposed to have that because they're not. Well, what they do is they work under the cover of the State Department, right? So they work in the
course, yeah,
on a State Department official, but she's actually a CIA agent. These are supposed to be like the smartest, the best and brightest that America has to offer for their country at the CIA. And she's fucking driving on the wrong side of the road with her kid in the car when she kills a 17-year-old boy.
That's really so tragic. And Trump tried to buy the parents off.
I'm sorry? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, they had Trump had them over at the White House and didn't tell the family that Anne Sakulis was there. Of course, so he like threw her on them, and they've been totally unsuccessful in getting any kind of justice for their son. Meanwhile, Julian Assange, take him. Alex Saab, take him. It's a tragedy, but this isn't new, right? I mean, I think with Trump. When I was in the Venezuelan embassy defending it from a U.S. seizure, we were citing the Vienna Convention. We were saying, look, if the U.S. is allowed to take this embassy, say goodbye to the Vienna Convention. And I think that's what we're saying. I don't want to say that this is the Assange extradition is a result of that seizure, because I think it has a lot of different roots. But it definitely normalized the international community to the idea that the United States was just going to break the international law.
They were saying that they were ready to storm the Ecuadorian embassy. They were threatening that, the British government. I mean, just the balls, honestly, like the level of disrespect is fucking astonishing. If someone does that to the Americans, they make movies about it for decades, right? Like Argo, but they're ready to do it in the middle of London, like, yeah, we'll fucking shoot him out, man. Let's go. They have no shame. They have no shame about this, and it's incredible. I even asked Fidel, because Fidel Narvaez, he was the consul in the embassy, because I wanted to know what happened with this plan to give Assange. They gave him citizenship, but then to make him a diplomat, and then try to get him out under diplomatic immunity. The UK just flat out refused to register him as a diplomat. Which, okay, fair enough. That's their right. But the fact that they were considering storming the embassy. I mean, they just have zero respect. It is real double standard in how they treat, their own and how they treat others. And I just find it absolutely loathsome how the UK bends over backwards for the United States, not just with this, with everything, but when the roles are reversed, you can see how the United States just craps all over its own so-called allies, which are more like client states. It's really indicative of what's going on.
There's some kind of noise. I feel like I'm getting symptoms of Havana syndrome. I don't know if there's anything we can do.
Oh, the noise, Kevin. I feel it too. I have the Havana syndrome.
No, but there's like some kind of interference coming in.
I heard it too. Yeah.
It could be an echo on my side. I actually, we rushed to go live because of the time zone difference. It changed.
I hear it
for
now.
me. So it might be an echo on my part. Let me plug in.
No, I think it's the hypersonic weapons that the Russians have directed at me.
Directed energy beams. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on the bright side is in a few years we're gonna have Mila practicing law and she's gonna fix all these problems.
Yeah.
Nice.
No,
Just the United States.
I'm actually starting this summer, so we'll get no, but this has actually stunned me because I learn a lot of UK law being a law student in Canada because we have the same system, but it's really funny to me, like even this mental health stuff is unreal because we read cases here about how the legal system's trying to be progressive about mental health and we're trying to treat it just like any other physical ailment. We're trying to treat it like we're not going to be like how we were before. And then we're kind of seeing it in this case being treated like a joke, and it's kind of going against everything that the legal community is saying that they're trying to strive for now, and trying to be like, yes, we're trying to be, sensitive to even when it comes to sentencing, right? We're trying to incorporate mental health when it comes to sentencing or when it comes to judges exercising their discretion. And this case is just a prime example of the complete opposite if it succeeds. But even the premise that this case is based on, where you have to prove how suicidal you are, I think is a very outdated concept of mental health in general anyway. Because it's essentially going to rely on stereotypes of what a suicidal person is like, when you can't. I don't really think you can even quantify or say yes, this is for certain. And so the entire premise of this is just totally against the direction that the legal community says they want to move towards. And so that to me is what's very mind-blowing.
Yeah, and if I can just add something incredible, I mean, that the prosecution have been arguing is that, Koppelman's approach is not satisfactory. It's not thorough enough, even though he spent the most time with Assange, because he doesn't rely on any of the notes or much of the notes from the prison staff, and he bases most of his medical evidence on self-reporting of Assange. Yeah, so does literally every psychiatrist on earth. Of course, it has to be based to some extent on self-reporting. It's not the only way, but it's definitely a core pillar of psychiatry. And there was a very important argument made given by one of the medical experts during the extradition hearing, which was, of course, you cannot rely 100% on the notes from the prison staff, because someone who's suicidal or having mental health problems in a prison would be maybe afraid to reveal those to the staff for fear of being placed in isolation or under suicide watch or whatever other restrictive or oppressive measures they might impose as a consequence. And so, of course, Assange, it's only logical that he confided more in Koppelman because he doesn't fear any sort of, consequences or any kind of negative impact from doing so to Koppelman. And again, I totally agree with you. I don't think that the legal community, I don't think a court of law should be trivializing mental health, stigmatizing it further, furthering these stereotypes. I think it's really insulting, and it's just not a sound practice of how the law should be applied. If it was being applied correctly, we wouldn't be in this situation in the first place, because Assange's health could be perfect. He could be euphoric 24/7, and he still shouldn't be extradited because he's not. He doesn't owe the U.S. anything. He's not committed a crime, and this is absolutely. It's so really loathsome that U.S. law is being, extraterritorialized the world over. I'm really dismayed that the judge. She basically found equivalence under the Official Secrets Act, so to speak, to assert that, well, what Assange did would have been illegal in the UK as well, and therefore the extradition is off. No, that's not true. There are many outlets who published the same things as WikiLeaks, literally because they were media partners with WikiLeaks. They benefited greatly from this. There are people who made careers thanks to WikiLeaks, and the things that they published, whether it's the cables, the war logs, it doesn't matter. It's very extensive. And my point is that these people are nowhere to be found now. And I'm not saying they should be extradited either, but the whole point is no one should be, because, this thing is not, it's not correct to do so. It's criminalizing journalism. And I don't want to go too off topic here, but this stuck out to me in the extradition hearing was, the founder of cryptome.org, who were the first to post the cables, he submitted a witness statement and said, I'm the one who posted the cables online, and the US government never asked me to take them down or went after me.
Yeah.
It's even on Twitter. You can see the timestamp, and it's incredible. This shows you it's a political witch hunt.
Yeah, and people who wrote on Assange's coattails are getting BBC interviews and book deals. While Assange is, and they didn't do anything, they just got access because Assange was generous enough to share access with journalists. But go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I was just going to say that we see, what Richard's pointing to here about the Official Secrets Act, and basically them saying that this is in the United States as the Espionage Act, is a fundamental misreading of the law in the United States, but it's also empowering the Justice Department to complete the revamping of this law in a manner that we had warned against. Like, we've basically been saying, like, a lot of people who are advocates for whistleblowers in these prosecutions have said that the U.S. government was using it as a backdoor Official Secrets Act. We don't have an Official Secrets Act in the United States. It does not exist. It is not a crime to publish classified information. And in fact, I'm not giving credit. I'm just trying to retell history here. President Bill Clinton vetoed legislation that would have created an Official Secrets Act in the United States. He did that in the late 1990s. So the U.S. does not have an Official Secrets Act, but to say the Espionage Act is one shows the ignorance, I think, of people who are on these courts that are reviewing these cases. I'm troubled. I'm really troubled by the lack of grasp that they have while they're deciding these extradition cases that require them to understand U.S. law. And we saw this on full display with the High Court justices letting James Lewis basically say that one rosy but unlikely scenario, which could play out with Julian Assange, is that he'd be acquitted by a court, and then therefore there wouldn't be no need for us to be concerned that he'd be held in a U.S. prison and treated humanely. And how would that happen? And this is where I had the biggest issue. They said he'd be brought to the U.S. and he'd apply for speedy trial. Well, nobody does that. When you go through an Espionage Act prosecution, you waive your speedy trial rights because you know that you are going to be embroiled in pre-trial hearings for probably a year, if not more, waiting until it finally gets to a trial, because there's classified information, and all of these spooks at these security agencies want to say all of these things about how the information can or cannot be used. They get to say to the Justice Department, no, you can't declassify that. Yes, you may declassify that. No, you may not use that to try this person. Okay, we're all right with you revealing that program. And so in order for us to have any trial that appears to have due process, they have to tell the Justice Department what they're allowed to show to the court. And then after that, James Lewis, as prosecutor, is really just ridiculous, saying that he could challenge it on First Amendment grounds. I mean, this is incredible that somebody can sit there and make this claim knowing full well that Espionage Act cases have been brought And defense lawyers have argued that it was unconstitutional to punish them in this manner because they had First Amendment rights, or because just the law generally is vague, overbroad. It's hard to tell that you actually have committed an Espionage Act violation. And so you don't have, I mean, this is a legal thing that, Mila might have some awareness of. You have to have a notice that you are going to be guilty of offending a law in order for you to be prosecuted. If basically any time anyone could just be charged arbitrarily without knowing that they've just committed a crime, it's not supposed to stand up in a court. It's not supposed to be a law that exists. So they say, oh, you could challenge it on First Amendment grounds. Well, no, he won't. He will fail. He would lose it. He's not going to get to walk free. This makes no sense. But the high court just listens to this and nods their heads approvingly, like, yeah, that, because I think to them also, they're thinking, this is great. This could be an escape route. This could be a way that we could rule in favor of the U.S. government and not have to create more tension with this government. Because again, they're a client state.
But that's not what Lewis was saying last year. They were arguing in court that it was a First Amendment violation. They were saying, well, they brought in witness experts saying, well, sometimes national security has to come first, and it isn't a free speech thing. It's very interesting how they're singing a different tune when it suits them. It's basically trying to rerun the whole case now. If we look at this with, of course, this was just a brief moment when they talked about this, because it was when we were talking about assurances on the second day, but in many ways they are trying to rerun the case. I agree with Kevin. I think Kevin put it very eloquently. The judges are perhaps, I don't know, maybe they have good intentions, but are, making a big mistake thinking that the United States is going to go easy on Assange or allow him to do what no one else has been able to do. We had Daniel Ellsberg testify, and he broke it down very simply, because he was in similar shoes to Assange, and, they were terrible to him. There was, I think he wasn't even allowed to speak, to offer a defense. Right. So he was the first one that happened to, and no one since has been able to do that. So it's like basically a secret trial that will guarantee Assange is put behind bars. And I'm astonished, because there are literally dozens of people who testified on Assange's behalf. Noam Chomsky, Daniel Ellsberg, the best neuropsychiatrists in the world, like you name it, historians, legal experts. They're all very clear on what this case is. And the prosecution had like 5 to 10 expert witnesses, and most of them refused to be cross-examined. And it's just incredible to me. It's really heartbreaking that the judge agreed with all the political charges, because this is going to create a terrible precedent in the UK. And if I can just add, in the last months, this summer, in the UK, Priti Patel, who's the Home Secretary, she's been, she responded to a consultation that was made, whether the Official Secrets Act can be made worse, right? So, they tried using it against Catherine Gunn before, and now they're basically trying to make it even worse, where, journalists could go to jail for up to 14 years. They are basically saying that, there's no journalistic freedom. You publish something classified, you and your source, you're going to jail, and this is something that you're an enemy of the state. It's really, I know it sounds like hyperbole, but this is really what they're trying to do. And it shouldn't come to surprises, and it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. If you look at what they're letting take place in central London to Assange, it's in line with their goals and policies. It's very much in line with that they would try and do this, implement this into UK law as well.
And judges are given, I don't think they don't know what they're doing. They're given a lot of power and discretion. They're less in charge than they are in a civil law system, but they're still given a lot of discretion. And I don't really believe that they're just kind of going on with it. If this was any other case, or if this wasn't if the defense was not someone who was a threat to the US empire, and the judges were accepting this kind of conduct from the prosecution, they would be called activist judges. And that's a derogatory term, not oh, you're such a good activist. It's not you don't want activist judges. And so to me, it seems very, and I'm not you know, I don't know the full details here, so I'm not gonna like slander the judges, but
Well, go
I
ahead.
do. No, but I do, like, I am concerned with the conduct here, and like concerned with the overall state of the profession, because it does seem very much like political activism rather than, you know, like being a neutral trier of fact, so to speak.
But I also,
Well,
just to be clear, because I was saying something about how I think they're just ignorant and don't really know the U.S. law. So I'm not suggesting that they aren't consciously pursuing this in a manner that would serve the U.S. government. But what I'm saying is that they don't actually have the knowledge to know that they're being bullshitted by these prosecutors, because they don't deal with U.S. cases. They also don't really know what U.S. prisons are like. They only know what they've been told in extradition cases. And there are things that they've accepted from the U.S. as evidence that sadly are controlling in these extradition cases. For example, we heard a high court justice say, I don't know which one, it was either the chief justice or the other one, but they said that SAMS being put in special administrative measures, despite its documented inhumanity, is not something that makes it oppressive to extradite a person. He said that very clearly. So they have to find some other way to point to it being oppressive. SAMS cannot be the oppression. It has to be Julian Assange's own mental health disorder that makes SAMS inhumane, which is really sick.
Yep. I mean, I again, this is such a. I mean, I can't believe we have to explain this, but I think it's very clear to anyone, if someone has, mental illness and you put them in a shitty environment, you're going to trigger something much worse. And even if they don't have mental illness, they have some maybe underlying issues that could turn into something bigger by putting them in such conditions. And, whether they call it SAMS or they call it CMU or ASHU, it's all oppressive. And I think this is a very important point that the defense made, which is that the source of the isolation is important here, because if it causes Assange to feel isolated and therefore his mental health worsens, then it will trigger a suicide attempt. And he's made it very clear that he would take his life. It's really tragic. And I mean, he knows what's waiting for him there. The judge in January, she even said this in her ruling, that Assange is, he told this to Koppelman, I think, and that was if he's put in ADSEG, in administrative segregation, which I think, Kevin will recall, they tried to pretend that it's Lewis tried to pretend it's not solitary confinement. Again, it's like they just lie so, callously to the judges about what the conditions are in the US. And they are effectively bullshitting them, unfortunately. But yeah, whatever they call it, it's gonna it would make anyone feel worse. Not just Assange, anyone would feel terrified and suicidal in such a condition, and it's a real predicament. I think one of the judges, so we had Chief Justice Burnett, and the other one was Holroyd. I think Burnett, he was involved in the Lori Love case, right? So, I mean, maybe there would be some compassion shown. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, there's very well documented evidence that ADSEG not only is like terrible for your mental health, but actually impacts your brain, like physiologically. And so again, it's very strange to me that argument is not entertained that seriously, but then like other dubious sorts of like, oh, well, he can't be suicidal because he went to the law library, is like seen as, like something that even would have any merit. I mean, there's special UN reports on administrative segregation that past a certain point, it is, torture. And so just, again, it just shows the absurdity of it all.
I mean, that's
and
who defines. Oh, go ahead.
Who defines what's oppressive? Is it the oppressor or the oppressed? Because I guarantee you that if you asked any prisoner who's been in administrative segregation, CMU, SAMS, whatever, whether they're oppressed, 10 out of 10 would say yes because of their environment. 10 out of 10. No, I have no doubt in my mind. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, and the issue here is that this is extra legal punishment, right? It's added on. It's in addition to this person being given a prison sentence. That's the chief issue. That's what you get from prison abolitionists in the country. The reason why they are against this is because not only do prosecutors send you to prison to serve your sentence, but they add on all of these different mechanisms and restrictions that do not get reviewed by a judge. The judge isn't the one imposing this as part of the sentence. These are the prosecutors in the Justice Department making these designations, which these are the ones who are, as far as like due process goes or like impartiality, these are the ones who are trying to hang you or put you behind bars and crucify you. And yet they're the ones that they have no review of their decision making to give you these additional restrictions. I think that's the core issue here, is that a judge isn't going to decide in the United States what kind of prison conditions Julian Assange is subject to. It's going to be the people in the US government who hate him viscerally. I mean, that's not to say that like a judge wouldn't have this, but that's another issue, is that the judge, the problem is that Julian Assange is so high profile that he gets probably a worse shot at justice than even an Al-Qaeda terrorist, to go back to an earlier example, because everyone has heard different things about him in the media that are character assassinations, things from being a Russian plant to even the more cartoonish caricature put forward by Bill Keller of like a bag lady who has smelly socks and doesn't take care of himself and is just not able to interact among people without being a socially awkward person. And, that can color the way people treat you, whether they're on the bench as a judge or whether they're the prosecutor. Like all of these people who are pursuing this prosecution are doing it based on rumors or preconceived notions that they've heard from through the grapevine within the security state, so to speak. And that is going to backfire and make it impossible for Julian Assange to survive.
I mean, just to underscore that a little bit more, I mean, people forget, I think, maybe inclined to forget how intense this information campaign against Julian Assange was, whether it's, with the sex assault allegations, or I remember when I did an article on this, when he got taken out of the embassy, the president of Ecuador and the U.S. media all said that he was smearing feces on the walls of the embassy.
What was that? Yeah, I heard that too.
Yeah. I mean, this is what they do when they catch, certain high profile targets. Like they said, Osama bin Laden had like pornography and Grand Theft Auto and stuff.
Wasn't that planted by Ecuador? Like, wasn't that what Moreno was putting out there?
Yeah, Moreno, and then all the media ran with it. Vice News ran with it. Like, of course they did. But here's the thing. I mean, and this is how it's bullshit. Is that he was under 24-hour surveillance. Like every inch of that embassy.
Where's the video?
Where's the evidence? Yeah.
No, seriously, I heard of this.
We have it skateboarding. The skateboarding was true. Yeah. But I guess
who wouldn't want to skateboard in the embassy if they had a chance? Wouldn't that be kind of fun to go through?
I guess he is a radical. But on a lighter note, I want to end with just kind of an open-ended question, just to try to lighten things up, because this is really devastating case, I think, for a lot of people. Me, when he's going to prison or going to having his court appearances, I can't sleep at night. It really affects me. And I think a lot of people are in a similar boat. So I want to lighten it up. And Trump said in response to the Yahoo News expose that he felt that Julian Assange had been treated badly. Now, I know that there was a campaign to have Trump pardon Julian Assange, and that things got directly to him. And I even heard, I don't know if this is true, but I did hear that Mitch McConnell threatened to go forward with the impeachment if he did pardon Assange. And I find that plausible. But what do you guys, what's your take on Trump saying that he thinks he was treated badly? Just to lighten things up before we end the show.
I don't know what to say. Trump has an interesting history. First he says I think the first statement he made about WikiLeaks said Julian Assange should be hanged or something, and then he said, "I love WikiLeaks," and then he goes back to, "I've never heard of WikiLeaks," you know. And what I mean, you want to talk about unfair treatment? I mean, Trump. I get it that there's a lot of pressure from, as you said, Mitch McConnell. I'm pretty sure Mike Pompeo was whispering in his ear 24/7 about that. Yeah, but I mean, you're still responsible for that. Trump isn't absolved just because he says that. It's very easy for him to say that now that he's out of office, and pretends to take pity. At one point, like I said, he didn't even pretend to know what WikiLeaks was. This is incredible. And I just on the note of Trump and Assange, I just want to say one thing, something that infuriates me. I don't know if it's a lighter note, but in any case, people always think that Julian is being prosecuted for 2016. I mean, this is the dumbest thing that I've ever heard. First of all, there's nothing to do with 2016. This is all about the Iraq war logs, the Afghan war diary, the diplomatic cables. And, this is stuff that goes back to the Bush, the Obama years. And of course, I mean, they've all continued the war on terror. There's nothing to do with that. It's absolutely nothing to do with that. And I think it's a shame that he didn't pardon Assange. Even Chelsea Manning, right? Like she didn't get a pardon. She just got her sentence commuted. And then, if I'm not mistaken, Kronberg did what the defense were talking about the other day, which was, he basically subpoenaed her back into custody. That's the phrase they used, that he might do the same with Assange.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's all one big gang, and they are, I don't even know what to say. I don't even know what to say. Trump is usually honest by mistake, but when it comes to
we're stealing their oil. We're trying to take Syria's oil. Why we're there.
But unfortunately, coincidentally, he was never accidentally honest with Julian, and would have been nice if he pardoned him, but I don't know. I'm not surprised that Biden continues this persecution that Trump began. So
what I'll say is I think Richard Nixon pioneered the idea of plausible deniability for a president like President Donald Trump, so that he could act like he has no responsibility whatsoever for the people in the executive branch who are carrying out these acts. In this case, we're talking about Assange. Everything that he did everything that his administration did while he was president, he wants us to believe he had nothing to do with. And so that's the thing here, is that, though, we need to recognize that anything that Trump has ever done has always been about himself. It's always been about like how this is going to make him look good. And if it's not going to make him look good, or if it's going to put pressure on him, he didn't stand for it. And that was that's what I take away from the Trump administration, is that no matter how many times he went against Hillary for pushing and being the imperialist that she is, and being in favor of Middle East wars, when it came time to really wind those things down and stop that action, he was not able to push against the Pentagon and stop it. He was not willing to spend the time to challenge it because he just didn't have the energy or interest. And you can apply that to the Assange case, because I did see that reporting too. It's highly probable that he took the threats seriously, that he would be impeached in the Senate if he upset enough senators by granting not only the pardon to Assange, but also a pardon to Edward Snowden. And that's why Edward Snowden is still living in Russia and hasn't been able to come back home and live among people who celebrate him as a good American. And that's why Julian Assange has not been able to leave Belmarsh and get on with his life wherever he would like to do that with Stella and his children. And the other thing I'll say, just as sort of along the lines of what Richard was saying about things that irritate him, this one is left over from the Trump era. It's these Trump supporters who get angry at me when I'm reporting on things that Trump administration officials did to Julian Assange. So when I was sharing details about Mike Pompeo's obsession with Julian Assange, who, by the way, we should not think is a good person in any way, shape, or form, and they are upset that I'm suggesting that he was obsessed with Julian Assange and wanted to seek revenge. And no matter how much Mike Pompeo maybe was open to these Podesta emails in 2016 before he got a position as CIA director. He's a much different person now. You know, he's an end timer who has his tentacles planted within the security state, and he's going to keep going back to that. And so, anyways, I just don't understand these Trump supporters who can't accept that their person was not a supporter of Assange. He clearly is not. If he supported Assange, he would have ended all of this, but he allowed it to continue.
Yeah, I mean, actually, you know, it's going to be really interesting because a lot of people are speculating that Pompeo will run. He got some kind of stomach surgery. I think he's lost a lot of weight really quickly. Yeah. Mila joined us, but she disconnected again. But I'm going to wrap up. But, you know, real quick, I want to say about Pompeo, you know, this is a guy who's very different from Trump on foreign policy, or at least how Trump claims to be. So if they go against each other in the primaries, which I kind of doubt, it'll be really interesting to see what kind of rifts that creates on the right. You know, Pompeo's a guy who will go and take money from, you know, the Church of Scientology or the Falun Gong cult, as I reported on my Substack. But yeah, well, guys, thanks for. Go ahead.
It's not a big deal, but I don't think one thing that is interesting about Pompeo, he's like the only person in the Trump administration who didn't publicly go against Trump in the final days of the administration. Mm-hmm. So like, I think you're right. There is no lane for him. If Trump's running, then he's basically taking away any shot that Pompeo has to run for the White House.
Yeah. Well, you might see some of the never Trump Republicans throw their support behind him, even if he was like, you know, carrying out all the worst instincts of Trump. He's very much a swamp creature and in bed with the national security state. But we'll leave it at that. Thanks, guys, so much for joining us. Keep up the amazing work. We're so indebted to the two of you for being so, you know, determined in your coverage of this issue. You're an invaluable source, and we just appreciate it so much. And I'll end this with saying, let's all hope for the best for Julian.
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks you so much for having us on. It's a great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Richard.
See you.
Kevin.